One of the hardest lessons in life is learning the difference between a relationship and a performance. We learn very early how to perform, to smile even when we are not fine. We learn how to say what other people expect, dress the part, play the role. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Society could not function if people did whatever they felt like doing all the time. But problems arise when we begin to think that relationships work the same way. Nowhere is that temptation greater to play the part than in our relationship with God. The people we hear and meet in today's readings have arrived at precisely that place where the sidewalk ends. They have reached the limits of what they can do for themselves. Abraham has reached the limits of what age and circumstance can accomplish. Matthew built a life that did not satisfy him. The woman has spent 12 years searching for relief. Jairus has come to the moment every parent fears. Each of them stands before a future they cannot manufacture for themselves. So we look to performance in order to fake it till you make it. The prophet Hosea speaks to precisely that temptation too. God says, I desire steadfast love and sacrifice, not the knowledge of God, rather than the burnt offerings. Notice what God doesn't say. God doesn't say that sacrifices are evil. Doesn't say that worship is unnecessary. Doesn't say the rituals of faith are meaningless. Rather, God says if all that you have is sacrifice, then you've missed the point. If all you bring is outward action, while your inward heart stays preserved, then something essential is missing. The same theme appears in the Psalm reading, Psalm 50. God says, in effect, I don't need your bulls or your goats. I don't need your offerings. What I desire is thanksgiving. What I desire is trust. Do you hear that? God's not looking for a performance, thankfully. God's looking for relationship. And that sounds simple enough, right? But it's surprisingly difficult because performances, they're measurable. Relationships are not. A performance can be checked off a list, but a relationship must be lived. And that brings us to the gospel. Matthew's sitting in his tax booth when Jesus walks by and says two simple words, follow me. He gets up and does just that. No debate, no application, no examination, no probation. Just two words, follow me. Matthew leaves behind the place he thought his life would be lived and begins walking a new direction. Who Matthew is might give us hope in our day. Because Matthew, he has very little to offer. He is not a religious leader, and he ain't a respected member of the community. He's not a model citizen. God knows his name, but so does Sheriff AJ. Yet Jesus calls him anyway. Jesus calls him anyway. Then comes the synagogue leader. He's the antithesis of Matthew. This is a respected man. He's an important man. He's a man with every reason to protect his reputation. Yet there he is, kneeling before Jesus, a father who has reached the moment every parent fears. Then we encounter someone who suffered for 12 years. She has no credentials, no standing, no prepared speech. She simply reaches out and touches the fringe of Jesus' cloak, and she is healed. 3 different people, 3 very different circumstances, and yet they all have something in common. Each of them has exhausted every other option. Matthew follows. The woman reaches. Jairus kneels. None of them knows exactly how the story will end. None of the actions are grand either. They simply take the next step toward God. That's faith. That's not performance. That's not perfection. That's not pretending. That's faith. The Apostle Paul says much the same thing in Romans. Abraham becomes the great example of faith, not because he possessed certainty, but because he trusted God enough to keep moving forward. The promise did not come through the law. The promise came through trust. Abraham believed that God could bring life out of barrenness. He trusted that God could create a future where no future was possible. And that trust, it was counted as righteousness. I sometimes wonder if we make faith harder than it needs to be. Perhaps a performance feels safer. I get less nervous speaking in front of people the more people there are. It's an inverse relationship between people and intimacy. If faith is a performance in that way, then I can control it. Yes. I can measure it. I can compare myself to others with it. And I can convince myself that I am doing better than someone else. But relationships do not work that way. No spouse ever says, I have completed the required number of affectionate gestures for this month. No parent ever says, sorry, I fulfilled my annual obligation to you. See me next January. Relationships thrive through trust, through presence, through love. The same is true of our relationship with God. God doesn't ask us to impress, but just to trust, to follow, even when we don't know where the road leads, to reach out when we're hurting, to ask for help when we can no longer carry the burdens alone. That is why Jesus quotes Hosea in today's gospel. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy is relational. Mercy requires another person, requires vulnerability. Mercy requires love. Sacrifice can become a performance. Mercy cannot. Perhaps that's why all 4 readings are really pointing us towards trust. Trust. Not because trust guarantees the outcome we want. That would be nice. But because trust keeps us connected to the God who walks with us, whatever the outcome may be. Faith is not certainty. Faith is not having all the answers. Faith is not even having an inkling of where to go next. Faith is not knowing how the story ends. Faith is taking the next step when you cannot see the next step. Matthew, he gets up. The woman reaches out. Jairus kneels. None of them knows what comes next. They simply entrust themselves to God. And perhaps that is the invitation for us this week. Not to have everything figured out, not to pretend we are stronger than we are, not to explain every mystery of suffering, of loss, of grief, but simply to take the next faithful step, trusting that the God who called Abraham, the God who called Matthew, the God who met a grieving father and a suffering woman is still meeting us exactly where we are. And that, in the end, is mercy. And you have already received it, so live like it. Amen.